an exceptional moderator to introduce them. His name is Somak Chattopadhyay. You'll find his bio in your handout, and I'm very pleased to introduce Somak.
Thank you, Eleanor. Thanks everyone for coming out today. Can everyone hear me? I hear a little bit of a reboot. Everyone hears okay? Got it.
But they may not be able to see you.
I'll try to move around a bit. So thank you everyone. Thanks ladies and gentlemen for coming out this evening. I first also wanted to thank Citigroup for hosting tonight's event, for sponsoring the event, and also to Eleanor and Mark, Karen, and other members of the MIT Enterprise Forum board for helping to organize today's event. I'm Somak Chattopadhyay. I'm a partner at Tribeca Venture Partners. We're an early stage venture fund focusing on digital media, digital technology companies, and mobile pretty much comprises a pretty large swath of our portfolio. I'd say about a third to a half of our companies, and I'd say the last two investments of our first three investments of the new fund are all either pure play mobile companies or addressing various areas of mobile content or mobile commerce. I also, besides thanking our host, the sponsor, and the MIT Enterprise Forum board, I want to thank my fellow distinguished panelists tonight. I'll let you guys actually read their bios in the handouts that are on your that you've got at the registration desk. But in no particular order, we have Rahul Bafna at Flurry, who really kind of manages all the stuff on the mobile advertising analytics side. We have Julia Schulhof, who comes to us from the App Labs at Hearst, who will give us an interesting perspective from the media publishing side. Ben Stein, who is the CTO and co-founder of Mobile Commons, a leader in mobile campaign management and mobile CRM software. And last but not least, Nihal Mehta, who's a CEO of LocalResponse. And besides being a very prominent mobile entrepreneur, also runs his own seed fund, ENIAC Ventures, so he has a great perspective of both being an operator and a seed-stage investor in mobile companies. So one of the things I'd like to do to sort of start off the discussion is talk about why we're here today. I was actually just speaking to Julia a few minutes ago about how many years people have been saying this is the year of mobile, this is the year of mobile. After a while, you sort of get desensitized to that. My own experience, probably like many others on the panel, was I first got acquainted with mobile back in the late 90s. So this was when I was in the startup side, and I was heading up product management for mobile for a division of what's now eBay, a company called Shopping.com. At the time, it was called eBay. And I remember at that time, I was trying to, besides heading up product management, I was trying to proselytize to agencies, brands, partners, consumers, people around the country, in some cases globally, as to why everybody would be doing everything on their mobile devices, from reading the news to ordering coffee to buying tickets. Basically, the idea was that in no time, in a matter of months or years, people would basically leave traditional desktop internet and do everything on their mobile devices. And I remember, this is a sort of a small anecdote, I don't want to take time away from our speakers today, but I remember vividly how kludgy the devices were back then in the 90s. So if you think about today, we still have some versions of the flip phones that people used back in the 90s, but I remember there was one phone which was like a Samsung device. It was 10 or 12 inches long, and there were only two buttons, one for select and OK, which were the feature buttons. And we were trying to convince consumers and brands and agencies devices rather than using their traditional desktop. At the same time, the carriers themselves had walled gardens in terms of what type of content they wanted people to actually access on their devices. There was also no way to track what was going on in the mobile devices like you have now through companies like Flurry. So there were a lot of things that were different back then, and clearly people like me and others who were proselytizing about mobile then were probably 12 or 13 years too early. But then if you look at what's happened over the last 10 years, and especially over the last 2-3 years, there's a variety of things that many people like Mary Meeker or even the heads of Google and numerous other tech companies have talked about that have led to the real revolution of mobile. Whereas if any of you watched Charlie Rose last night, Larry Page said that this is probably going to be the first generation where kids today will be, their first computer they will be using is a mobile device. And Mary Meeker has written some great reports as recently as a few years ago talking about how quickly mobile has accelerated in terms of user adoption. So I think a lot has changed since the 90s, but one of the key things we want to focus on today's panel is the whole area of consumer adoption. So a lot of people out there, including I'm sure some of the people here in the audience today, are either working for startups that have a mobile product or companies that have a mobile product, or thinking of starting a company that is issuing a mobile product. And one of the things people have to really understand is what drives adoption, how do you get users to use your content, and how do you actually monetize that, what are platforms people are building on top of, and that's really what we'd like to talk about in today's panel. So I basically, one last thing I want to mention from an investor perspective is that when we look maybe even say 3-4 years ago, most of our companies started designing an application or a product focused on web and then mobile second. I'd say most of the companies we see now today are starting with a mobile product first, and then maybe might have an ancillary product focusing on the web. So there's definitely a lot that's changed in the last few years. So first, what I'd like to do to get into the actual heart of the discussion is maybe starting with Rahul and go past the panel just a minute, a little bit about your role within your organization and how you look at the mobile content ecosystem. What's your particular area that you're addressing?
So just in case everyone's not familiar, I'm at a company called Flurry. We do a mobile analytics solution, which is installed in about 150,000 different apps across iOS and Android, and through that, about 500 million devices worldwide. So our focus is on providing an analytics solution to help the developers of those apps understand how users are using those apps, where they're starting, where they're falling off, understand the monetization, help them figure out if they should do an ad-supported business or a freemium business. And then through a lot of that analytics data, we're also building out an ad platform. A lot of apps want to be free. That's how they get a lot of distribution. And in that case, their only source of monetization is through advertising. So we're building an analytics-powered monetization solution for them, which we just launched a couple weeks ago.
I'm Director of Product for the App Lab at Hearst, which is both a physical space and also a group. And I think as Somak mentioned, the company is very much focused, at least our group is very much focused on taking traditional media and putting it on these new platforms. While we do have some what I would call utility apps, and we are exploring ways of taking, if you will, atomizing the content that comes from our publishing teams into the types of things that would work on a handset. It might be just in time. Primarily our focus is on taking traditional content and figuring out efficient and effective ways to reach audiences who are now migrating toward using tablets for reading and subscribing.
My name is Benjamin Stein, and I am the CTO of Mobile Commons, so I'm in charge of product and technology. Technology is behind the most effective text messaging campaigns today. So we work with consumer brands who are trying to get their message out into consumers' pockets, government services, a lot of healthcare, and a lot of nonprofit and political groups who really have a need to communicate. So I have, a slightly different perspective than the other panelists, which is we don't do anything in the app world. We are a communications company. We believe text messaging and phone calls, and at a skyrocketing pace, mobile web is sort of the best way to reach the broadest audience. So that's going to be sort of my angle for this conversation.
Hi everybody, I'm Nihal, CEO of LocalResponse, which essentially is an ad network that leverages social signals like Twitter, Facebook, Pinterest, Instagram to provide smarter targeting across mobile devices. So for example, if you were to tweet, "I'm hungry," you might actually see a banner for Pizza Hut on your mobile device. And those are the types of things that we put together. I'm also an investor in mobile startups for about the past 6 years, have about 50 investments. A lot of them are consumer-facing apps, so I have a lot of experience there, but as well also with respect to mobile education, mobile healthcare, a few other verticals as well.
Yeah. Well, I encourage for the questions we're going to ask, I want to save at least 15, 20 minutes for Q&A, but I'd like to start with the whole area of platforms and the pros and cons of platforms that you develop on. So, are you finding, any of you who are on this panel, certain types of platforms are generating more ROI? So in Nihal, your example, if you're helping brands reach people through social platforms, are there certain devices or platforms, let's start with you, where you're finding a more effective ROI?
Yeah, I think ad-supported platforms, for those of you that have developed on iOS or looking to do any ad tech on iOS, it's a nightmare because Apple has effectively deprecated UDID, which is a unique identifier for each device, which means the browser on the iPhone essentially does not support cookies. Apps do not support cookies, versus Android and Windows Mobile that do. So it makes ad targeting a complete nightmare on iOS. But I always tell developers to focus on one platform first from an app perspective, and I'm sure these guys have a lot of thoughts on that. But take Instagram, for example, and so all their growth on just making an amazing app on one platform, and perfected that until they rolled out to another one.
So, Julia, tell me, extending on what Nihal just talked about, so if you were going to start with one platform first, how does it work within Hearst? When you're talking about mobile enabling a particular magazine, do you focus on iOS first and move on to Android? How does that work?
Yeah, I was going to say traditionally, but that would be traditionally as of a year ago, whatever. Yes, I think that for us as a publishing company, you all know, in October of last year, Apple launched the newsstand, and there's this focus on recurring subscriptions, which is, our bread and butter. And so in the first instance, and I think because the market really was there early on with iOS, we focused on developing for the iPad. And then, the challenge is really kind of figuring out how do you streamline that workflow to get to the other devices that are up and coming on other platforms as well. Because our goal is that we want to sell subscriptions on wherever there's a newsstand. So that could be any of these OSs. So.
And if you look at your current publications that you do have available through Apple's newsstand, so how many of them are also now available through Android or any other platforms like that?
Increasingly, more and more of them. We've been rolling out with different partners. I think you know that Hearst is one of the founding partners of Next Issue Media, which started on as an Android-based platform. So that's really becoming increasingly a focus. But this is mostly through partnerships. So again, it's we generally tend to focus on the iOS platform in the first instance. It could always change, but that's really
Got it. And then, Rahul, you collect data on thousands and thousands of companies that are developing apps. So how are you seeing the split? I'll come to you too, don't worry. How are you seeing a split between iOS and Android in terms of what people are developing on and where they're getting the most ROI?
I think what we see is the same as what you guys said. A lot of people start on iOS first. And I think there's a few reasons for that. One, they want to perfect the app in its first iteration, and it's a lot easier to do that on iOS because there's basically 2 screen resolutions that you need to develop for, and a handful of devices if you go back 3 years. The other thing is if you're trying to monetize by getting people to pay for the app, it's a lot easier to do on iOS because they require an iTunes account. If you want to buy something, basically all you need to do is give them your password. Google Play has cleaned that up a little bit, but it's still not as smooth as on iOS. I think there's also probably a demographic split between the 2 platforms, and all things being equal, iOS users might be more willing to pay for apps up front. We see that in, I think when Angry Birds Space came out, it was free on Android and ad-supported, whereas on iPhone and iPad it was paid like $1 or $2, and that's just because they've looked at the data from the past on how those users perform, and they basically launched with a pricing model that works for them.
Got it. Ben, your perspective, as you said, is you're somewhat agnostic. You're focusing on text messaging and HTML5, but are you also able to track the type of devices people are accessing your content from? Can you talk a bit about what you've seen in terms of trends and what's been most effective for the organizations that you're powering mobile campaigns for?
Sure. So typically when we're sending out text messages, we don't know who's receiving it. So I can sort of talk about the data that we get from clicks on the mobile pages, and industry data, which is people with smartphones text a whole lot more than people with feature phones. So we started this company about 5 years ago, before iPhone came out. And when iPhone was released and Android was released, there's a lot of question, is text messaging, what's going to happen to it? But what the data shows is the growth has been like this, nonstop. And people with smartphones text a whole lot more. So that's sort of the best data point I can give.
In HTML5, so you said you're also focusing on people who are actually accessing through the mobile internet. I mean, I'll ask this question to any of you on this panel. How many of you are right now developing or working with companies that are developing stuff for HTML5 versus actual apps? No?
Yeah, I think I'm a big believer in HTML5. I think it's definitely the wave of the future. I feel like, it's analogous to sort of what happened with the PC going from, installing Microsoft Word on your CD to now getting it on the cloud, right? And you can do that now because bandwidth is a relative commodity. Now with the advent of 4G and 4G devices, bandwidth is so much faster on the handset that things are going to be able to be run in the browser versus apps. So the analogy is, 10 years ago you used to buy Microsoft Office, install it on CD just like you download apps today and you have it on your phone. But now everything's in the cloud, on the PC, everything will be, I think, on the mobile device as well.
Before I leave the topic of platforms, I guess you guys have all talked about how iOS is a platform people develop on first, and we've also got the ease of distribution and payment. What, on the flip side, are the negatives of developing? I mean, the most obvious being the hefty tax that they're getting in terms of their share of revenue, but is there any other things that are reasons not to develop on iOS initially? Are there?
I would say, and by the way, I wanted to mention that we also do distribution through Nook and Kindle. So from that perspective, we are actively on Android-based platforms. But that we see that more as a kind of distribution channel and less about developing for it. I think the drawback with iOS is it's very time intensive, and I think one of the nice things about the promise of HTML5, which we've all been talking about for, I feel like that's another thing we've been talking about for some years now, which is great, and I think it's almost there, but is that, you could create something once and essentially just distribute it to as many different places as possible without having to, have iOS developers coding for you. And with Apple, it's, everything that you change, you basically need to resubmit. You need to go through the Apple approval process, and those of you who've done it know that, it can be somewhat grueling depending on the circumstances. So,
on the data side, though, one question I would ask you, Rahul, is for Apple, you're clearly collecting certain types of data, but being a closed system, is there anything that you are not able to get in terms of data from Apple that you could from a more open system like Android?
To date, I don't think that's been a problem. We're able to collect the same types of data from both platforms. If anything, there's a risk, there's always a risk that Apple will reject your app submission for something that they don't like in your code. And an analytics SDK could be one of those. An ad network SDK could be another one of those. And the feedback that Apple gives you when they reject an app is pretty minimal. So it can be hard to trace that.
Opaque.
Right.
Got it.
I like the features of HTML5. I do want to kind of point out, I don't think it's a silver bullet. I think betting on the web and HTML is a very good bet. But if you use the Facebook app on your iPhone, it's not very responsive, it's kind of sluggish. There is a time and a place for each type of technology. And if your app is mobile, it's mobile only, you're leading with mobile, and that experience needs to be optimized. Having the lowest common denominator being the web may or may not be the right choice. So, do I think it's great in the future? Yes, but it's not panacea.
So let's now turn to another area which is very much on the mind of not only mobile developers, but also people who are in the publishing world, or anyone who's creating a mobile app or site. And that's basically once you've developed the app, how do you actually get it out there? So first of all, you want to get the approval from Apple if you want to be on iOS. But then how do you then get new users? How do you get not just new registered users, but people who are engaged and inviting their friends and making it a viral application? I wanted to cite an interesting article that came out, I think, just a few weeks ago. I don't know if you guys saw this. It was by Liz Gans, who wrote on All Things D, which the article was entitled, "A Million Users Show What's a Hit in Today's Metrics." And so she actually went through some interesting stats and talked about, we always hear about, the celebrities in this business, how Draw Something, reached 50 million downloads in a matter of months. Angry Birds reached that in 35 days. Instagram went from 1 million registered users in December 10, 15 million in 2011, 50 million April 2012 before it was acquired for $1 billion by Facebook. But the issue is, do registered users really matter, right? I mean, first of all, what defines a successful application, right? I mean, how is it number of registered users? Is it, actually the article cited one of your colleagues at Flurry who said that in Flurry's view, I don't know if you feel differently, said that they define a hit as 1 million daily active users per platform, 1 million on iOS and 1 million in Android. So really, what matters in terms of tracking the success of a mobile site? And then a second question really is, how do you make sure that you don't just generate 1 million or 5 or 10 million users? That's all great, but that they're continuing to come back and engage and bring other users. Do you want to start with that, Rahul?
Yeah, I think the number of users, it's an interesting metric. It depends on what you're trying to accomplish. If you have 1 million users using the product for free, is that as good as 10,000 users paying $100 a year for that product? Depends on what you're trying to accomplish. If you're a startup, what's your exit strategy? Are you trying to generate revenue and go public? Are you trying to get acquired for some kind of strategic benefit? In terms of what's big, what can drive viral growth, I think a couple companies published statistics on what it takes to break into the top 20 on Apple's App Store. And if you can break into that, at that point, there's so much organic traffic because of that visibility that you can almost stay up there.
I think I was reading somewhere, I think it was saying that to be a top 10 iPhone app in the US, you need to get basically 1.5 million to 2 million downloads per month. Does that sound right? Or?
That sounds about right. Yeah. We've been tracking them actually, I think, per day, and it's in the 50 to 100,000 range. You can also pay companies to help you get up into that range. Those downloads are generally
not so much white hat. Yeah. And what kind of companies are you talking about?
These are, I wouldn't call them ad networks, but they're kind of like bot farms, and for a fee, they will get your app up into those upper rankings. And then again, once you're up there, you get a lot of visibility, and it's easy to stay up there. And Apple's algorithms haven't really caught up to tracking false downloads, through these bot farms versus actual organic downloads. The quality of the traffic, of course, is very different. Those are users that download the app once, may not use it over and over again, and generate the kind of revenue either through advertising or in-app purchases that you're looking for.
Got it. I have Julian just going this direction, we'll mix it around. How do you look at the success of a mobile site and compare it and benchmark it to your traditional web or print?
Right, I'm focused mostly on apps, so I'll speak from that perspective. For us, majority of the magazine apps that we have are free to download, and so the key is, what's the conversion rate to paid? And Rahul mentioned the in-app purchase, and that's really what I was referring to before in terms of subscriptions, the recurring subscriptions. And so, first you can get a lot of visibility. We obviously have a good relationship with Apple, and because we're on the newsstand and we've got, top quality magazines, they want our content to be front and center. But that doesn't guarantee that the people who are downloading the application are actually going to A, buy anything, and B, if they do, how engaged are they?
And so you don't have to just tell me specifically about the properties you're working, but how would you define a successful conversion rate, or moving from a freemium to paid?
Yeah,
what percentage would you target?
Well, I don't know that we have specific data that I can give you in terms of what the percentage would be. But it's a fraction. It's right now it's not a huge number. So if you get hundreds of thousands of downloads, you're not necessarily going to get 100% or even 80% or really high percentage of people who go from downloading an app for free to
But let's say comparing, I'm not asking you to talk about numbers by Hearst, but comparing it to web conversion, right? So if you think about low single-digit percent, is that something that...
Yeah, I don't know that I have those numbers off the top of my head. Maybe some other...
Does anyone else have? Nihal, but when you look at, as an investor or even stuff, you look at what do you think makes a good conversion rate?
Yeah, the one stat I love looking at, and this is why I'm so optimistic about Facebook, is daily actives over monthly actives.
Okay.
I think that's a killer stat. So Facebook's at about 50%, right? They have almost 1 billion monthly active users. of which half are active every day. And I think that's a really important stat because it shows ridiculous retention and that the app is sticky, kind of that Web 1.0, adjective that we use. And when you have a sticky user base, you can do a lot of different things, right? You can create virtual goods, you can add subscriptions, you can, obviously monetize through display as well.
So, Facebook, I think we would all agree. I agree with you. It's a complete, it's unbelievable. If any company came anywhere close to that, it would be amazing. But what do you think for more companies that aren't Facebook, what do you think is a good benchmark or a good target hurdle rate in terms of daily actives?
Yeah, I think, and Rahul, you probably have more data from an aggregate level, but we most of our companies are doing at least 20-25% daily or monthly. There's actually a couple companies, here's a shameless plug for one called Thumb, that's doing better than Facebook, and it actually has even more time per user session than Pinterest. It's just highly addictive, kind of instant opinions. You take a picture of your shoes, and within a minute you'll get 1,000 responses from the network. And you can vote as well, and it's very addictive. Don't play it now because then you won't pay attention to the panel. But it's interesting because the sheer number of people downloading apps and using these apps are like the multiplier has gone up significantly. Like month, I think quarter over quarter. You're probably seeing this, but 2 years ago, if somebody had 1 million downloads, you're like, well, that's great. Now 1 million downloads is nothing. Now apps can get 1 million downloads overnight, right? Because the sheer penetration and pervasiveness of these devices in people's hands. If Apple features an app, in the App Store, they're probably getting 50,000 downloads a day. And that's if they're featured.
Yeah.
That's never happened before, and every day it's more. So it's like that order of magnitude changes so quickly so that your baseline has to change with those numbers.
That's very helpful. So daily active versus register is a good metric to track. Now, just the original question about finding the user. So you said some people are using more black hat techniques like bots, like the same way some people do that with Twitter followers. But what are some more white hat ways in which people can effectively get, a top ranking on the Apple Store, or just find users in general? Maybe Ben, you obviously deal a lot with brands and nonprofits who are trying to build out a user base. How do they go about doing that? How do you start building a list or a group of users to use your app or your site?
Sure. So what we always say is almost no one finds out about mobile apps, websites, programs on their phone. Right? They always find out about it from all the traditional media that the companies do. So it's shameless plug on stage about Thumb. It's television. It's display. It's billboards. It's in the arena. People find out about mobile programs using all of the communication channels that they've always used. So having a clear call to action, instructions on how to get the app, text this to this, go to this app store and do this. Having a very clear call to action, and leveraging the communication that you've always done is the way to do this kind of distribution.
So even if you're going though to other mediums, are you saying the idea is if you already have a community of users you developed in other mediums to try to encourage them to port over to mobile? Is that what you're? Yeah.
So I guess I'm thinking more about a large organization who already has some sort of a marketing ability, right? So this is not a new startup who is just trying to launch on mobile. But if you already have the reach and you're trying to convert users to mobile and get those conversions into someone downloading the app, paying for the app. It's leveraging the existing channels and not focusing on mobile as a distribution channel.
And then, so that makes a lot of sense for some people in the audience who are existing companies in the list, but how about if you want to, right now as a developer, if you're trying to figure out if this app has any potential, and you want to see whether it has, is it worth the effort, where do you make the decision that there's the inflection point, it's getting the right number of users, and now it's time to double down? Nihal, or anyone want to talk about?
Yeah. It goes to the, you probably talk a lot about this at Tribeca, the viral coefficient, right, of apps. I think that's, when we have developers just starting an app, what I like about the App Store today and the app market today is it's a relative meritocracy, meaning if you create a good app that solves maybe a problem or that's addictive, that encourages a lot of sort of consumer behavior, and there's amazing viral hooks in the app. So meaning, great Facebook integration, great Twitter integration, maybe a Pinterest integration, where users want to share their experiences, and that experience then is multiplied 10, 100x fold, right? Look how Instagram built up such a rabid user base because they were leveraging Facebook and Twitter as posting pictures. Similarly, Zynga on Facebook. I don't think there's a company today that can go from 0 to 60 that quickly without leveraging these social networks, right? So even a developer that just creates an app for the first time, that literally has no money, that like just throws together a product, can make really good use of very smart sharing features to the social graph, and that app can take off. We've seen that happen.
That makes a ton of sense. I mean, actually, I was going to, Ben, one of the things, this is a shameless plug for Mobile Comes, because I work with them as an investor, but you could take the SOPA campaign where you basically, how many users did you actually generate? Can you talk a bit about, I mean, I think it was hundreds of thousands of users, but was it people, organizations already distributing to their list, or were people tapping their social networks, their social graphs to get to that number?
Sure. So I'll tell a little bit of the backstory, which was a few months ago, a lot of internet companies were fighting SOPA, the Online Piracy Act, right? They wanted to block the bill in the House and the corresponding bill in the Senate. So a lot of big internet companies, Tumblr in New York most notably, was really fighting this legislation. And what they did is the day before the vote is they blacked out their Tumblr dashboard. So when someone logged into Tumblr to follow all of their blogs, they got a censored page that said, this is what the internet will look like if you don't do something. Enter your phone number and click here to call your representative. And then so since Mobile Commons works with a lot of nonprofit organizations, we knew a lot about using mobile and phone calls to call representatives. So they were able to use us, and they generated in that first day 87,000 phone calls, which is something I have never seen before. We've seen a lot of advocacy campaigns, but I've never seen a consumer internet brand, basically like a platform that has this reach, like a Tumblr, similar to any online social network, leverage that. They're like the background, right? Like Tumblr is great because of the content that people put onto it, but they just kind of stepped in front and said, hey, we're going to communicate with our users. We're actually going to have a voice here. And what they were able to do, like flipping a switch, and to give them a lot of credit, they executed flawlessly on this, was just amazing in one day.
So, I mean, Tumblr is a company that, if you're an investor or an entrepreneur in the media publishing space, you just can't help but ignore how just unbelievably explosive their growth has been. But if you look at some of the major companies out there today that have developed mobile platforms, if you think of Tumblr, Twitter, Foursquare, even Facebook. I mean, this is obviously, given being in the wake of the recent IPO, there's a lot of discussions at every cocktail event you go to about what Facebook is doing, what's happening on the mobile side. The question is, a lot of these companies have used mobile to drive a lot of the growth, or rather consumers are flocking to mobile as a platform, but in terms of the monetization models for any of these companies, it's still very, they're in their nascent stages, right? For any of those companies you mentioned, I mean, some are generating revenue, but we're not talking about billions of dollars of revenue, or if it's the mobile side for Facebook, in this example. So can you talk, we will start from Nihal and come this way. Can you talk specifically about once you've now hit that inflection point in terms of hitting the right viral coefficient and growing to not just lots of registered users, but daily actives, what are the ways in which people are effectively monetizing?
Yeah, I think, Facebook is never going to charge a subscription to their users, right? They're talking about currency. I think in terms of advertising, they have a really, really unique position. They're sitting on a treasure trove of data, of all of this intent data. So do you guys know a company called Axiom, for example? They will literally know when you're going to move before you move, right? Like they have all of this data that they're collecting from all these different sources. I call Facebook kind of Axiom on crack, because the amount of data that everybody feeds into Facebook with their personal lives is unprecedented, right? So talk about a simple example. You change your relationship status from, single to, or from engaged to single or something, right? All of a sudden, forget the banner ad, you can start seeing interstitials for dating services, right? That's just at the tip of the iceberg. Think about all the other data that you feed into Facebook, when you maybe go for a run, when you go eat, when you go out, all the lifestyle information that you feed in, the ability for them to now tie that intent with advertisers and buy literally intent actions, and I think that's the new model. It's not going to be CPM or even CPC in terms of banner ads that we say ad mob, 60% of clicks are accidental because your thumb is bigger than the stupid banner ad on the phone. It's going to be much more targeted, and it's going to be, and when an ad becomes that targeted, it becomes content. It's going to be extremely contextual, and Facebook's going to deliver content basically on behalf of advertisers. So I think that's the big idea for Facebook.
So content on behalf of advertisers. So I'd like to just drill a little deeper there. So what would be an example? What would be an example of a use case of how they would deliver content for a brand? Can you give an example?
Yeah, so it could be, again, you change your relationship status, all of a sudden you get a pop-up. Hey, can we help you? Hey, can we help you go on a
Some of the
date?
stuff that you could do at LocalResponse. Yeah,
Right, yeah, it is very similar to
Got it.
LocalResponse in the sense of intent-based marketing.
Got it. Do others have anything to comment about monetization? Actually, Julia, why don't you talk a bit about what is your intent? When being part of the senior leadership in mobile apps for Hearst, are you expecting to see a certain type of contribution to the P&L? Or where do you see in terms of the shift in terms of revenues to mobile versus print?
Well, I think that there will be a shift. Right now, I would say for most big publishing companies, the percentage of subscriptions that are happening on the mobile tablets is a fraction, but it's growing, and I think it's growing pretty rapidly. And so that is that's our bread and butter. So our magazines obviously carry advertising, and in some cases we have, and increasingly more, we have advertisers who are thinking about not just having a page ad that looks exactly and is exactly a replica of what is in the magazine, but thinking about the context in which the ad is being presented on a mobile tablet, the fact that it's connected, the fact that it's got location-based services on it, the fact that you can shop from it, those kinds of things. So I think there is an increasing interest too in being able to harness the community of subscribers on these tablets and thinking about other revenue streams. So there's advertising, but then there's e-commerce potentially, and so forth.
And what kind of advertising models have you already started to employ? So are you doing pop-ups, interstitials?
It's interesting. I started in the tablet space working on Elle, the French. It was originally a French-based fashion magazine, and we did have a more kind of web-like way of delivering advertising, which was after the nth swipe, you were delivered an ad. What we found was that women who are interested in reading fashion magazines, even if they're on a connected device, don't want to have ads served the way that you would serve them on the web. They want to feel like they have more control, and so it was interesting feedback that you get when you do these usability studies with real people and who are kind of coming to the app and using it for the first time, or maybe they're existing users. So they tend to like to have that experience of swiping. It's a familiar user experience, I would say. And in the types of apps that we've been focusing on currently, that's more sort of what we're giving them. But what those ads can do once you get onto that page, that's where the real kind of creativity can come in.
And can you talk at all about the places where you have run actual advertising? How do the CPMs, or is it a CPM model like this on the web?
It's I don't think any of the big publishers are selling anything on a CPM basis within the iPad or these tablets at the moment. It depends, but a lot of times it's sponsorship based. Yeah, and I think more and more you're going to start to see analytics and those kinds of numbers being shared. But Hearst has not been, very forthcoming about a lot of analytics in terms of advertising. So that's been their position.
Well, Rahul, maybe you could talk a bit about that side, right? Like, how have you found people are monetizing, and do you have any data that shows how, if it is, even if it's not a CPM model, if it was like, if you're looking at on an effective CPM basis, what is the difference between what they're seeing in mobile compared to traditional print, traditional web?
So obviously our focus is on the advertising side of the business. That's where we generate revenue. A couple of the models we've seen, one is just showing normal banner ads, of course, in the product, or interstitials, which are on a CPM basis, or CPC sometimes. What we've started to see is publishers wanting to increase their number of users, not just by acquiring new users, but by re-engaging older users that have dropped off the app. So what we can do is kind of look at users that were active in the app, say 7 days ago or a month ago. They haven't used it recently. We can ping them with an ad to ask them to come back. We can also ping them with the rewards if you come back. Let's say it's a video game. You can ping them and give them a reward of some kind of virtual currency to come back and play that game. And what we've found is that those re-engaged users tend to be worth about 1.5 to 2x what your average new user is worth.
That's interesting. Well, I mean, we could continue even further on this area. Monetization models alone could be a new topic, but I wanted to open the floor to some questions. I'm happy to ask other questions later, but are there any questions from the audience?
Hi, I've got one question. I'm from Fort Lee, where you can't text and chew gum at the same time. But more seriously, Apple certainly is suggesting that they're going to go to a voice-based system in the future, if not starting now. And how is that going to affect the ability to intersperse advertising?
Somebody want to respond? Don't want to. I mean, I've seen. I mean, what was it? What was the voice browsing company that went? What was it from the late '90s? I can't remember.
Wildfire.
Was it Wildfire, or was there another one?
Dragon.
Well, Dragon, which was acquired by. I mean, I don't know. From an investor perspective, I would say I see some people focusing on things like text-to-speech and finding things to do on the translation side. I mean, I think it's an interesting application, but I haven't yet found it something that's big enough where people are saying they want to design just for that as a user experience. I mean,
Well, just on Twitter itself, doesn't it make more sense for somebody to send a clipped message by voice rather than texting it out? Why do people want to write it out?
Well, I mean, look at. I mean, I don't want to make this. We were talking about mobile content, but Siri is an example. I mean, I think for a while, a lot of people were using Siri and saying that was going to be the way in which people. And I'm sure people still use it some way, but I still think it's a long ways from being effective enough as a way to supplant or to replace traditional web browsing. But are there? I mean, it's an interesting question. Are there any other questions? Yeah.
Hi. On the monetization side, you've probably all seen these charts of time spent with media versus ad dollars spent in that particular medium. And obviously, we're in the early days of mobile now, but there's a pretty sizable gap in terms of usage and ad spend. Just be interested in people's perspectives. Do you think there's equilibrium that we'll be able to reach at some point in time, or does the mobile media have certain limitations where it won't generate its proportionate level of ad dollars?
Yeah, I think mobile media from the buy perspective is just catching up now. On that graph, I'm visualizing probably the same thing. Time spent on mobile far exceeds any other platform, right? But yet the money spent on mobile is de minimis comparatively, right? I think last year it was probably 1% of total ad spend in the U.S. About $300 billion spent, right? About 1% was mobile. I think this year it might double, but there's still a huge gap. So I see it when talking to agencies and brands that they're still not diving in with both feet. They're still not signing off the $1 million or $2 million insertion orders. I think they're afraid that, Coca-Cola, for example, they have $500 million to spend in digital media, and they want to do it in maybe 10 different places. They don't want to do it in 1,000 different places, which mobile was predominantly fragmented in different publishers, right? So it's like, where can I move the most money? I can move the most money in TV, I can move it online. I can't necessarily move it that quickly in mobile. At least that was a maybe preconception. I think that's changing, though. I think it's changing in a big way.
Yeah, I mean, I would echo what Nihal says, and I'd say we have some of our own data points through some of our own portfolio companies. Like there's a lot of our, I'd say about a third of our portfolio focuses on advertising technology as a sector. And when we look at just how, when you look at the revenue composition of traditional web versus mobile, I'll give you an example. We've got a portfolio company my partner Brian's involved with, Bonaflex, which launched a product called AppLeads about a year and a half ago, and they basically do opt-in advertising, so cost per lead, CPL lead generation for some of the largest brands in the world. That was a nascent business a year and a half ago, and that should now become one of the largest drivers of revenue this year. It may even, it may actually take over traditional web advertising. So if you can show from an advertiser, especially in this case, it's opt-in advertising. So people who want to basically engage with the Huggies brand are basically signing up to get information and advertising from Huggies. They're seeing effective CPMs that are multiples on traditional web eCPMs. And then you look at the success of AdMob and Millennial and other companies that are doing stuff in ad tech for mobile. I think it's still, there's a lot of, I think we look at it as an investor side as there's tremendous greenfield opportunity. I think there's going to be a consistently larger swath of advertising spend in the next few years.
Hi, regarding targeting capabilities on mobile versus web, how do you see the targeting capabilities are any different based on access to data, based on demographic or anything else that really differs between how you're targeting it on a mobile app versus a website?
I think Nihal covered part of the difficulties of that earlier in the conversation when Apple deprecated the UDID and made it a little bit tougher. So we can, of course, on a mobile device, you can track using the IP address, which just kind of gives you some location information, and then, of course, the device that they're on or the app that they're in. It's a little more difficult to build up a behavioral profile on a user if you don't have a consistent ID with which to track that user. So a bunch of companies in this space, Flurry included, are developing alternate methods of doing that. And the more data you have from the user, so not just from one app, but from multiple apps, the easier it is to build that profile. But in the absence of the equivalent of a cookie in the mobile space, I don't think it'll evolve to the same point that it has on desktop anytime soon.
Another question?
Hi, I'm curious from the panel, so certainly with Facebook going public last week, that's a big topic. What are some of the key indicators you guys are going to be looking at from the panel, and also from a venture capitalist perspective, the impact of Wall Street? What are some of the key indicators on Facebook that you're tracking to see if Facebook is really staying true to what made it as popular as it is today, now that it's public? Are there certain things like daily over monthly? Are there current metrics that you guys are really tracking that you're going to see, especially from an advertising standpoint as well? Are there going to be some new techniques that Facebook's going to bring out now that they have to meet the demands of Wall Street?
Who wants to start? Does someone want to start from the entrepreneurs? I'll give the venture.
Yeah, I'll just say something quick. It's maybe more qualitative than quantitative, but are they still attracting the best talent in the Valley? And yes, that's completely true, right? They're sucking talent away from Google. They're sucking talent away from Microsoft, whatever talent's left. Sorry, yeah, exactly. And there are a lot of really, really smart people at Facebook, and they're all pretty young. And I think, qualitatively speaking, that's a mark of a good company. When they start losing engineers and they start losing folks like Google, then I think it's time to sell your stock.
I think. Oh, sorry. You go first, and I'll talk about it. Go ahead.
Sure. So this is also qualitative, but if you kind of read the investment letter that they put out that Zuckerberg wrote, it's look, we do this. We spend money to make a great product. We don't have a product to make money. Right? Is that marketing spin? They've been pretty true to that. Right? They've really done a nice job of keeping the user experience at the top priority. So I think that we are going to see some pretty interesting monetization strategies from them. I have absolutely no guesses, but I don't think it's going to look like traditional display stuck into your newsfeed.
I think the growth of the company is great and retaining talent is great, but now that they're public, they're going to have to start showing revenues. If you listen in on your average Google earnings call, yes, people care about how many people are on Google Plus or what the growth is, but at the end of the day, if they didn't hit 35% year-over-year growth, that stock is going down in the morning.
Yeah, no, there's definitely a lot more scrutiny as a public company. I mean, here, I'll take a slightly contrarian view on this. I mean, as an investor, for instance, we're always pitched tons of startups. Sometimes we're incredibly passionate about the team, the market. Sometimes it's at a price that we just find hard to justify. Not always. If it's a big idea, hopefully we're not going to be price sensitive. But I think Facebook is an example of something like that. I think I'm not a public stock analyst. I don't take what I say as any indication of what you should do on Facebook stock. But I think that just because maybe it's not worth 100 billion, maybe it is. But that doesn't mean it's not a very compelling company. Any company that is reaching such a large fraction of humanity every day, approaching billion users every day, and not just adding new users, but the daily active rates that Nihal talked about, it's unbelievable. So I feel like they're in the first or second inning, and I think that you just look at the evolution of Apple. Apple, had its ups and
This
downs.
video is about a totally new way of innovating. Today, most companies only innovate internally with their own R&D department. They seldomly involve their users in new product development.
I think that Facebook could potentially have that type of platform in the future. It's not there yet. But I think
Companies innovate, users and customers don't. They're just passive consumers paying for products and using them.
I got sick of it like this morning.
But tomorrow there's an entirely new way of innovating.
That's actually as a venture investor, this means
Users can communicate and create new solutions together when they share their ideas.
A few days of trading in Facebook doesn't mean we're any less bullish on the
And the company of tomorrow will innovate with innovative users.
When you look at Amazon stock when it first went public.
It is all about finding innovative users, empowering them to innovate and capture what they develop. And there are scientifically proven methods to do this. The lead user method, the user toolkit method, and the virtual user innovation community. Users can innovate together online from all over the world, and you will find user solutions in target and analog markets. So join the user innovation revolution. Learn more at usersinnovate.com.
How does that impact mobile content?
And read the book, Join the User Innovation Revolution, available from Users Innovate.
Veered away from that because it kind of blurs data a little bit and you can't measure it as accurately, but it kind of fragments your office. Veered away from that because it kind of blurs data a little bit and you can't measure it as accurately, but it kind of fragments your office. Veered away from that because it kind of blurs data a little bit and you can't measure it as accurately, but it kind of fragments your office. Veered away from that because it kind of blurs data a little bit and you can't measure it as accurately, but it kind of fragments your office. Veered away from that because it kind of blurs data a little bit and you can't measure it as accurately, but it kind of fragments your office. Veered away from that because it kind of blurs data a little bit and you can't measure it as accurately, but it kind of so just steer away from that extra quality and let's then so just steer away from that extra quality and let's then so just steer away from that extra quality and let's then so just steer away from that extra quality and let's then so just steer away from that extra quality and let's then content through. There's a lot of junk there, so how do you curate? Trying to find whatever content through. There's a lot of junk there, so how do you curate? Trying to find whatever content through. There's a lot of junk there, so how do you curate? Trying to find whatever content through.
Curated.
There's a lot of junk there, so how do you curate? Trying to find whatever content through.
Curated. Because, most people when they think about magazines,
there's a lot of So how do you find where the parts are?
Because, you know, most people when they think about magazines,
There's a lot of junk there. So how do you find where the parts are?
because, you know, most people when they think about magazines,
There's a lot of junk there. So how do you find where the parts are?
because, you know, most people when they think about magazines,
There's a lot of junk there. So how do you
bring in the latest
find where the parts are?
sort of thing. And so because, you know, that's how you people when they think about magazines,
There's a lot of junk there. So how do you
bring in the latest
find where the parts are? I mean, on a certain time of day, you know, a whole bunch of other variables. What you're likely, they're going to be right a lot of times about what you were looking. They're almost finishing the thoughts for you. Now, when you add location data and other things that you're getting from your mobile devices, I think there's some incredible opportunities there.
Yeah, I think if you can combine location data with maybe visual data, which is what they're trying to do with the Glasses project, they can start to generate information based on where you are, what you're looking at, almost in your line of vision.
Yeah, that's a really cool glass project. One other question?
There's one over here.
Okay. No, we don't want to get in between you and the drinks.
Yes, I know it's really a genie out of the bottle on privacy, and mobile is really all about collecting data, aside from the user experience. But on the how are we going to make money side, it's all about collecting data. There's a lot of talk about do not track. Other than making your content so good that people opt in, do you think we'll ever roll back a little bit on how much you can collect data without people's knowledge or consent? I'm not necessarily saying that we should. I'm just interested in where you see it go.
well, I would just say from our perspective, we are very careful about people's privacy, and so, you know, we do always take, you know, we're just updating some of these privacy policy links, but we take it very seriously and make sure that we are transparent to users as to when, you know, we're collecting data about them. So.
There's an interesting trend that actually Local Response, we feel like we're capitalizing on, which is that this younger generation, we call them sort of the generation of digital narcissists. I think we're all probably too old to be in this generation. They don't care about privacy. They love to post things on Facebook or on Twitter like, I'm going to the bathroom. And they'll have like 100 of their friends like that post. And then they'll be compelled to post it again because the feedback loop is completed. So that literally we watch behavior of millions of people that do this every day. You know, and so, and Zuckerberg knows this, right? That's Zuckerberg's law, that more people are going to share things more often, right? It's going to increase by the rate of 2x, more than 2x every year. And so you do definitely have to protect privacy, but in the context that people are giving information publicly, there's so much data there to mine. You know, so like Twitter, for example, 400 million tweets a day, increasing about 20% a quarter, and that's all public information. You know, and that's a great data source. So I feel like privacy is becoming less of a consideration because people are posting more things publicly.
Yeah.
I think on the other end, on the desktop side, basically regulation is pushing the browser manufacturers to install the do not track buttons by the end of the year, and they've agreed to do that. And I don't think it'll be long before that works its way into mobile. The problem is there's a lot of great content companies that make that content available for free, and it's ad supported, and a lot of that advertising is paid because of the kinds of targeted advertising they can do. If you take that away, there needs to be another monetization strategy to pay for that content.
Yeah, there has to be monetization of that. I think your point is a very fair one. I think the investor side of me and the entrepreneurs out there probably look at this as an opportunity, but as someone who also worries about how your data may be misused, like all of us do, I think there's a fine line. So far, I think companies like Google and Facebook, for the most part, and other companies have shown that they can be good corporate citizens, but there is a fine line between providing targeted data and misusing it. I think we'll be curious to see how it evolves. But I do believe that goes back again in terms of room for innovation to Nihal's point about how more and more people are tweeting about their bowel movements or whatever else that they're doing. This is where you begin. I think when you look, especially people in the older generation, you're like, oh God, Facebook, do I really need to see another post about that? They just tune out. There's going to be need for it to keep people daily active and engaged across the broader demographic. I think you're going to be much more targeted in terms of filtering and curation of relevant content. So
Somak, there's a question.
Yes, so over the last 3 years, a lot of the parameters around mobile have clearly developed, and I think everybody sort of tries to optimize them at the moment. What is the next real big innovation, the next real big thing that will change mobile? We heard about speech, but then there was a healthy dose of skepticism around speech. What is it, from your perspective, your experience, that will be the real next tectonic shift in mobile?
We'll cover some.
Yeah, I think the networks need to improve. I think we'll see, they're okay, but they're definitely not good. And I think we will see a lot more innovation once that happens. That's not a specific technology, but you can't get an AT&T signal here, right? That's a problem. And so that shift will make a lot of innovation happen, just like it did with broadband.
There's one topic which I think, again, is worthy of a whole other session, but I think one thing we didn't talk about tonight was the whole application of mobile for the developing world. So a few of us, I think Nihal and I are both co-investors in a company targeting the emerging markets. But not everyone is a iPhone carrying 20-something kid who is multiple devices or digital natives. There's billions of people out there who have mobile phones who don't yet have smartphones. That number will keep changing over time, but there's still this huge market that hasn't been penetrated in a very effective way. And I've seen various types of companies try to do it, some that we've been forced to invest in, but there's another interesting company I'm not an investor in. It used to be called TextEagle, that's using mobile SMS to basically conduct market research for brands in villages in India and Africa and providing mobile top-up minutes for people who answer these particular surveys and research. And there's things like that where you can monetize, and it's kind of it's not only, it's a socially good cause, but it's really attracting a segment which I think is the fastest growing area, which is not just the US, but the developing world, which I think there's a lot of room for innovation.
Time for another?
Yes.
Okay. One question I'd like to hear more about is there's been some discussion of, is HTML5 killing apps? What's the place of the App Store? And it seems to me, from a publisher and a consumer viewpoint, there's very little that the App Store offers long term. They take the 30%, they give you some marketing, but as HTML5 improves and you can get all the functionality you want in an open web application, what is there that Apple can hold on to maintain their place in the market? They can fight for a long time, but what can they really hold on to?
Yeah, I think, as you mentioned, one of the things that they offer is marketing. It's that curation, and it's giving users that visibility into what's popular, and then that therefore just drives more viral growth. One of the things we've seen with apps versus HTML is it's easier to integrate the device hardware functions into the app. So the GPS, the camera, the motion sensors, things like that. Will HTML5 catch up? It probably will. But for the near future, we see apps as having a richer, faster experience.
Yeah, I think the faster, there are now, and I'm sure you guys are seeing it too, we're seeing examples of people developing rich media, multimedia on HTML5, and I'm seeing some surprising speed on some of these things, but still, I think for a little while longer, something that's heavily data intensive and CPU intensive, doing something just right now through traditional HTML5. For traditional content and other types of things that are not using rich media, I think it should be. I think HTML5 it makes sense, but for certain types of applications, I still see apps being more the right platform. I don't know. How about you through your investments?
Yeah, I would agree with Rahul in terms of real distribution. Like today, so fast forward maybe a year with HTML5, and maybe SEO and SEM actually becomes a big driver for finding these HTML5 apps, just like we do on the web today. But in absence of that, the only big distribution channel is the App Store. And it sucks because it's on a 2x4 screen. So like how many apps can you actually find on the screen? But that's still, I think for a long time, going to be the portal, if you will, right? It's kind of like AOL. 1995.
Or Yahoo, yeah.
Yeah, 1995, and AOL. Like when the internet first came out, like that's where you found all your content, right? Before there was really a Google to search and SEO and SEM. It's pretty much just similar analog,
yeah, great.
right? Like who knows when SEO is going to become compelling on mobile web.
Yeah.
So, 2 quick thoughts on it. One is it's important to separate is the discussion about the technology or is it about the distribution channel? Right, so is it HTML versus a native app, or is it using the open web as a way to search for apps that you can then bookmark on your home screen? Right, so it's 2 different conversations. And the other thing I want to give Apple a lot of credit for is, for the first time, people install programs on a computer. Right, so going to your Mac or your Windows computer, downloading something, installing it, and not being afraid of breaking the computer is a really, really big deal. Right, for up until 3 years ago, people did not install programs. And now it's super easy and super safe, and there's no fear, and you can install it, you can try it, and you can erase it. That's amazing, and that's unprecedented.
Well, thanks.
I was just going to add one quick thing is that everyone focuses on 30%. As publishers, if you do any kind of distribution of paper magazines, you're actually losing money through the distribution channels. So 30% is actually good. Making 70% is excellent. So.
I want to thank all of our distinguished panelists tonight for a really compelling discussion. A few of us hopefully will go around for cocktails afterwards, but thanks everyone for coming and thanks to our panelists.